My name is Anita Kaplan. I'm an LCSW, and I do the clinical outreach for Milestones Ranch Malibu. And thank you. I just wanted to give everybody a very warm welcome, and thank you so much for being here tonight. This is the first of a free addiction series called Fact or Fiction, The Truth About Addiction. So we'll have several of these going on over the course of the next year. I just wanted to take a moment and introduce our visionary leader, Denise Klein, who's our CEO. Denise, I know you did not want me to publicly thank you, but I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge all the hard work and effort and your heart and soul in putting this event together. So thank you. I also just wanted to take a brief moment and thank a few other people. Jennifer at the Canyon Club and all the staff at the Canyon Club, thank you so much for making this event run smoothly. And of course, Candace Presser, Audrey Newmont, and Brenda Rippey, thank you so much for supporting the vision and making this all happen. The Milestones Ranch Malibu team, thank you guys for doing so much of the behind the details work in putting this event together. Thank you. And also Anthony from the Malibu Times, thank you so much for getting the word out on what we're doing tonight. And of course, Christopher Kennedy Lawford and our extraordinary panel of presenters. Thank you so much for doing this and giving us your time. So just a quick agenda for the evening. We'll have our keynote speaker come up and present for about 45 minutes, and then he will be taking questions from the audience. We will then have our panel presenters come up, and then they'll have about an hour to take questions from the audience. So it'll be really nice to get some feedback and support. We will also have our resource room and our compassion room available at the end of the evening. We will have therapists there to provide additional support and resources and hope for your loved ones who are suffering from addiction. And just a side note, if you could please turn off your cell phones. Also, this is not a marketing event. This is really for our community and our families to get some support who are truly suffering alongside their loved ones. This event will also be videotaped, and it will be posted on YouTube, and that's for public education only. So if you do have a question that you want to ask the panel privately, you're absolutely welcome to do that at the end of the event. So with that, I am going to read off the bio for Christopher Kennedy Lawford. Christopher Kennedy Lawford spent 20 years in the film and television industries as an actor, lawyer, executive, and producer. He is the author of 3 New York Times best-selling books, Symptoms of Withdrawal, A Memoir of Snapshots and Redemption, Moments of Clarity, and Recover to Live. He has also published Healing Hepatitis C, What Addicts Know, and When Your Partner Has an Addiction. In recovery for more than 32 years, Mr. Lawford campaigns tirelessly on behalf of the recovery community in both the public and private sectors. He works with the United Nations, the Canadian Centre on Substance Abuse, the White House Office on National Drug Control Policy, and the World Health Organization. He also consults with Fortune 500 companies, numerous nonprofit groups, and treatment providers, speaking around the world on issues related to addiction, mental health, and hepatitis C. Recently, Mr. Lawford has focused his advocacy on the need to build a world of recovery by developing tools, content, and community that enable those recovering from addiction to realize an enhanced, productive, and meaningful life. In 2009, California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger appointed Mr. Lawford to the California Public Health Advisory Committee. In 2011, Mr. Lawford was named Goodwill Ambassador for the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime to promote activities supporting drug treatment, care, and recovery. Mr. Lawford holds a Bachelor of Arts from Tufts University, a Juris Doctor from Boston College Law School, and a master's certification in clinical psychology from Harvard Medical School, where he held an academic appointment as a lecturer in psychiatry. Mr. Lawford has 3 children and lives in Los Angeles. And without further ado, I welcome Christopher Kennedy Lawford.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. Milestones. So this is great. It's good to be back in Los Angeles with a group of people that I know. I know a lot of people here. I've done this a lot for fun and for free in some of the rooms that some of us go to, but I never really intended on becoming a cheerleading advocate for recovery. But when I was 17 years in recovery, I wrote a book about my life. That made me a ton of new friends. It pissed my family off, but so I haven't shut up since. When I wrote that book, I wasn't a writer at the time, and some people in my family had written books before, but they had written books about profiles in courage, or the Cuban Missile Crisis, or the family health, the national health care crisis. My grandmother wrote a book about her life. Nobody in my family thought I should write a book. I had sort of blown up my life. I was 15 years in long-term recovery, and I was living in the Pacific Palisades in a house that my cousin let me. It was a sort of a teardown, and there was this little mouse, and my life was in ruins. And I used to march around this house, lamenting in a bathrobe, lamenting what had happened in my life, and talk to this mouse. It was my only friend at the time. And this guy called me who was writing a book about the Kennedy women, and he wanted to talk to me about the Kennedy men. And I said, look, you write me a letter and tell me why the world needs another book about the Kennedys, because I think there are too many already. And he wrote me this letter, and he said one of my cousins had this amazing story that needed to be told. And I called him up and I said, well, if you had told me that you wanted to impress a girl or you needed the money, I would have talked to you. But the only reason that story needs to be told is if my cousin wants to tell it. And I slammed down the phone, and in that moment I thought, I should write a book. Now, that was completely insane. I was on serious medication for hepatitis C, and I was hopeless and suicidal. And that was my best thinking at the time. I hated writing. My mother always said I was a good writer, but she loved writers, so I thought she was trying to turn me into something that she liked. But it turned out I had an aptitude for it. I wrote this book, and it did kind of well in the world, and this avalanche of opportunity came back to me. There's this need to do this kind of work, to begin some advocacy. 12 years ago, there weren't a lot of people talking about this illness in places other than 12-step basements. So I intended on writing a novel about a guy trying to figure out women. I'm still working on that book. So I never really intended on being a poster boy for addiction, but I've learned in my recovery that my plan is not always the plan. Once I accepted that this was my path, my challenge was to find where I could help. And it really became clear to me that there was one area that needed a lot of help. It was the keystone of my life at that point, and it was recovery. During the research I did and writing of a book called Recover to Live, I got to know Dr. Nora Volkow, who is, as some of you may know, is the director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse. A really smart woman, and she said to me at the time, she said, Chris, we understand prevention and we understand treatment because we spend a lot of money studying those things. We don't know anything about recovery because we don't spend any money on it. Dr. Volkow believes that if we understood recovery better, we get people there sooner and we keep them there longer. I couldn't agree more. Addiction is arguably the most media-covered disease in America, yet the silence of recovery is deafening, and I want to help change that. Society, as some of you are intimately aware of, often treats those of us who are afflicted with this disorder as if there's something wrong with our character. Few people know or understand addiction is a brain disease. The American Society of Addiction Medicine has classified addiction as a primary chronic brain disease, not just bad behavior or bad choices. And there is virtually no difference between the chemical addictions and the process addictions like food or sex as they relate to the brain. Chronic abuse of substances or activities, whether it's cocaine or sex, result in similar changes in the same neurotransmitters in the brain. That's a scientific fact that few people in broader society are aware of. Would it make a difference in their attitudes about this illness if they knew that? I think it would, and I think it's our responsibility to educate them. When I say our responsibility, I'm talking about people affected directly or indirectly by addiction. People in recovery, but also their loved ones, service providers, and any concerned citizens who recognize addiction as the #1 public health crisis in the United States and see it neglected at every level of society. I know from firsthand experience and observation about stigma and stereotypes. I know stigma and discrimination are real, and I believe that those of us in recovery are partially responsible for it continuing. Some of us who find recovery want to forget where we came from and move on with our lives. Many others don't believe we have the right standing or ability to hold society accountable for how this illness and those who have it are treated. So what comes back to us is the stigma of indifference and blame and outright discrimination. I bet you didn't know that there are over 13,000 statutes on the books across the country that discriminate against those of us in recovery with a drug charge in our past. That's a lot of us. Stigma and discrimination are real, and will continue until the recovery community, as I've defined it, takes its rightful place at the grown-ups table and exercises its right to be heard. If you want to change anything in the United States of America, you need money and grassroots, especially now. We have neither. We have to build, if we're going to change anything, a financially sustainable world of recovery. We need a donor class that's going to give money to this illness. The American Cancer Society raises $1 billion a year. The disease of addiction affects society and the individuals three times as much as cancer does. We raise $20 million a year. We have no political grassroots, so there's nobody in the states that can hold these legislators accountable for what they do in Washington or in the state capitals as it relates to this illness. So nobody is really doing anything. It's time for our community to stand up and say loudly and clearly that we don't treat other chronic diseases like cancer and diabetes as moral failings, and we shouldn't treat the disease of addiction that way either. Not long ago, I was at a meeting on the west side of LA, and I heard a woman who was 25 years in recovery. She worked at a big financial service firm on the west side, and every year her company asked the employees to write down on a note card what had been the thing in their life that they're most proud of. And this woman wanted to write down that the thing that she was most proud of in her life was her recovery, but she felt she couldn't do that because there would be too much risk to her career. There would be too much stigma associated with what was the proudest achievement for her in her life. I began my advocacy speaking out so people would know that addiction is an equal opportunity disease, that it can affect a family who has everything just as easily as it can affect a family who has nothing. Today I speak out so people know that recovery from addiction is possible, that recovery is not just about staying away from a drink, drug, or behavior a day at a time, but is also about restoring and enhancing the lives of those affected as well as the lives of those around them. And I speak out to urge others to do the same, because the awareness that recovery is possible, along with the disseminating science proving that addiction is a brain illness, will help dispel many of the myths and much of the stigma surrounding diagnosis, treatment, and recovery. Addiction is a chronic disorder. It's not inherently different from other conditions. Society's made it different because the symptoms of our disease in its active phase, i.e. drug and alcohol use, at times makes us behave in ways that are all too visible and, yes, sometimes illegal. So in recovery, we are judged on the extreme symptoms of a disorder now in remission. There are over 24 million Americans in recovery from addiction in the US. That's 10% of the adults in the United States. Results from the first nationwide survey of persons in recovery from addiction to alcohol and other drugs documents the dramatic improvements associated with sustained recovery relative to periods of active addiction. Yet discriminatory practices in housing, employment, health insurance coverage, and elsewhere remain tremendous barriers to sustainable recovery. We know today that a majority of the general public already believes that addiction is a disease. Almost half of American adults know someone in recovery. Most Americans support people in recovery and would feel comfortable being friends or working with someone in recovery. But a majority of Americans also believe that being in recovery means a person is trying to stop using drugs and alcohol, with less than 1 in 4 believing that recovery means a person no longer uses drugs and alcohol. That means most Americans believe that recovery is a constant struggle to stay clean and sober. It means that when they hear recovery, they think relapse. It means that when they hear recovery, they may well think unreliable, not to be trusted as colleague, employee, tenant, friend, or family member. Beliefs have consequences because they drive behavior. So how do we change these beliefs? Focus on the emerging science, spread the message out that treatment works, and the outcome studies to prove it. Demonstrate what recovery really is, and those of us in recovery have to stand up and be public about the transformative and productive lives we live in recovery. We need to be disciplined in our messaging that addiction is a chronic brain disease, necessitating a holistic response, allowing those in early recovery to confront all their problems and needs at once. Not only addiction services, but physical and mental health, housing, education, vocation, family, etc. And that only by treating all the problems at once in an integrated way is there any hope of getting a person back on their feet and on a road to a life beyond their wildest dreams in recovery. We must be resolute in our message that there is no pill, vaccine, or one treatment-fits-all solution, and whether you're dealing with trying to get an individual well or shifting the prevention, treatment, recovery paradigm, it's going to take the whole family or our entire community to make it happen. It's going to take commitment and persistence. It's going to take political will, and yes, it's going to take money, a lot of money. Will it cost more than the $400 billion annually active addiction costs the individual, communities, and to the country? Of course not. And remember, people in recovery contribute to society. They pay taxes, spend less time in the criminal justice system and the ERs, and have healthier relationships. Recovery is relapse prevention. It's crime prevention. HIV prevention, kids in foster care prevention. It's devastated urban communities, multiple generations of hopeless people prevention. Recovery is social problem prevention in every area of the nation's economic and social life. Some say that fixing this problem is still going to be too hard. But as my uncle President Kennedy said about our commitment to go to the moon, we don't do these things because they're easy. We do them because they are hard. My Uncle Jack was sick a lot when he was most of his life, and he spent a lot of time in bed, and this was obviously before the internet, so he read a lot of books. And he loved books, autobiographies and biographies, and he told us when we were young that what he learned from those books was that anybody who achieves something great in this world usually overcomes something equally great. There are millions of folks who have overcome addiction, one of the most difficult things a person can do in their life, many of whom are capable of achieving great things in their life, but who are more often than not stigmatized and ostracized by society. As we move out of church basements into broader society, we have to begin to tell our stories differently. We can speak of the strength and hope of recovery rather than rehashing the ugliness of an active disease. The world needs to hear what we have learned and what we have accomplished in recovery. And it doesn't have to be contextualized. Recovery should be good enough to stand on its own for society because it's good enough for us. Now, let me tell you a little bit about my story. Aldous Huxley said that experience is not what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens to you. I was born somebody with everything, and I lost it all to addiction. Today, my message is that with desire and access to treatment and care, it is possible to once again become somebody with everything really worth having. I grew up in Malibu, California, right down the street. My dad was a movie star. He was a member of the Rat Pack. Some of the people that were hanging around our pool were Judy Garland, Frank Sinatra, Marilyn Monroe. Judy Garland used to come over and play the piano. I couldn't wait for her to leave. Frank Sinatra was a great friend of my parents. He was my sister, Victoria's godfather. I had godfather envy from a really young age because Uncle Frank would come over to my sister's third birthday party with really inappropriate presents for a 3-year-old, like diamond earrings. Marilyn Monroe was a great friend of my mom's. They used to walk the beach. Marilyn would wear a scarf and stay out of the sun. And when I was 6 years old, she taught me how to do the twist. And when I tell people that, especially men, they go, wow, Marilyn Monroe taught you how to do the twist? What was that like? I have to remind them that I was 6. But I do remember her having a pretty dramatic impact on the adult males in the room. My mom was from this big Irish Catholic family in Massachusetts named the Kennedys, who before 1960 nobody ever heard of. But in 1960 that all changed when the Democrats came to this city, nominated my uncle to be president. I went to that convention. I wore a little red jacket, waved an American flag. I was absolutely mesmerized by the American political spectacle. But of course I was 5, so I fell asleep in my chair before any good stuff happened. My mom brought me back to my uncle's hotel room, put me in his bed, and she went back and voted for her brother to be the nominee. She was a delegate. And later that night, after it was all done, my mom and uncle came in, and my uncle sat on the side of the bed, and he woke me up, and he looked at me with great purpose, and he said, Christopher, I've been nominated to be president of the United States of America. It's going to be a very hard job. Will you help me? And I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, and I said, sure, Uncle Jack, can we do it tomorrow? But can we do it tomorrow? Because I'm kind of tired right now. One of my chores as a young boy was to raise the presidential flag whenever Uncle Jack came to visit. A flashbulb or a television camera often highlighted the ordinary events of my life. I had some lofty standards to live up to. Let's see, after elementary school, I need a movie deal and a political nomination. I really should get my grades up. It didn't help that I was born into a family where addiction doesn't just run, it gallops. I'm Irish. I've heard it said that God invented alcohol to keep the Irish from ruling the world. My family almost proved him wrong. Almost. My intention was to follow my Uncle Jack, write a best-selling book in college, win a Pulitzer Prize, overcome a major health problem, and at 45 become president of the United States. I got 1 out of 5, the major health problem. My mom and dad used to hang out at a bar called the Beachcomber, right down on Channel Road. A legend has it they went straight from St. John's after I was born with me and my bassinet, placed me on the Beachcomber, and ordered their favorite cocktail. I suppose they thought of it as kind of a hip Malibu neonatal unit or something, but that's the first place I ever went. I used to think that's where I picked up my addiction. Today, I know that I'm a product of an addiction perfect storm. I was born with the genetic front loading for this illness. I carry the trauma resulting from the brutal public assassinations of my 2 uncles and my parents' subsequent divorce. And I was truly a child of the 60s with all the permissiveness and ignorance that that time represents when it comes to this illness. This perfect storm blew a giant hole in my soul. It had to be filled. My first drug was sugar. Nobody noticed because every kid in the world loves candy and wants more. It's the idea behind Halloween. Actually, now that I think of it, Halloween's a perfect analogy for addiction. Going door to door, pretending to be somebody you're not. Begging for more. When I was 13, I found drugs and alcohol. When you're 13 years old and your only high has been a Snickers bar, LSD, rum, and heroin can answer a lot of your questions. Now, I'm not saying Snickers is a gateway drug, but it might not be a bad idea to keep your eye on the 13-year-old in the corner who's a chocolatey mess. From the moment I first got high, the only thing that mattered to me for the next 17 years was where I was going to get my next drink and my next drug. Better living through better chemistry became my credo. Drugs and booze fortified me. I didn't feel like there was anything I couldn't accomplish if my medicine cabinet or yours was fully stocked. Of course, it was an illusion. Drug and alcohol addiction took me to 3 jails and 3 intensive care units, landed me in the newspapers and on the evening news, damaged and permanently scarred my liver, heart, and lungs, significantly reduced the opportunities I was lucky to be born with, drove away most of the worthwhile people in my life, leaving behind a posse of lower companion bartenders, pharmacists, and drug dealers, and killed my parents and my best friend in the world. I was physically, mentally, and spiritually bankrupt, but I still had the resume. An exceptional resume equaled an exceptional life. If the outside stuff was looking good, then I was good. I went through college, law school, and received a master's certification from Harvard Medical School in clinical psychology with an emphasis in addictive behavior while fully enmeshed in my active addiction. I held jobs on Capitol Hill and in Hollywood, and because of my addiction, I missed out on most of it. Drink by drink, pill by pill, I whittled down my self-esteem and any belief I had in myself to nothing. This is the deep and corrosive effect of addiction, to obliterate the promise that we are deserving and capable of having an exceptional life. Many addicts will die before they surrender and find recovery, and many of us stay active in our disease longer because of those that enable us. The last time I was arrested, the cops in Brookline, Massachusetts, let me out of their back door because my uncle happened to be the United States Senator from their state. My privilege had once again allowed me to dodge another bullet. At the time, I was grateful. Today, I know that if I was held accountable that night and was able to access treatment, it might have been enough to change my trajectory. As it turned out, I got another 6 years of self-inflicted misery. Giving an addict or an alcoholic a get-out-of-jail-free card is never a good idea. If there's a back door, we'll use it. If there's an easier, softer way, sign us up. If there's another angle or long shot to play, we're in. It's what we do. And most of us will do it until we run out of options. Only then will we consider throwing in the towel. The next day, I got a call from the Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts, and he was not happy. He told me that he was going to send over a very large, very mean state police officer to babysit me if I couldn't behave myself for the next 3 weeks until the presidential primary, where my uncle was running against Jimmy Carter for the presidency of the United States. Some families plan interventions. In my family, intervention meant threatening phone calls from public officials. My family wanted to help, but they were dealing with their own issues. And we didn't have nearly the amount of information about this illness that we do today. I remember my aunt, Eunice Shriver, who started Special Olympics, saying to me, she said, "Christopher, we're pretty good at dealing with the world's problems. We're not good at all at dealing with our own." The ethic back then was damage control, instead of taking a proactive stand on getting me real help. Maybe it will go away or get better, they thought. And if the outside stuff was looking good, school, jobs, not getting arrested, then I must be okay. And since the resume was still looking good, or relatively good, nobody bothered. I went to a psychiatric hospital in 1969 because of my drug addiction. At the time, I wondered why my mother was sending me to what was referred to back then as the nut house. I realized soon enough that it was because I was nuts. The doctors diagnosed me with depression and said it was one of the underlying causes and conditions of my addiction. I didn't believe them. At the time, I thought I just liked getting high. Today, I know my addiction is a mental illness, which goes hand in hand with depression and bipolar disease. I've learned in my recovery the importance of treating not only one's addictions, but the underlying causes and conditions as well. My family had a difficult time confronting my illness. No way in the world would they accept that my problem was actually a family problem. Needless to say, world leader or movie star was not looking like a career option for me after all. Despite what you see on Entertainment Tonight, addiction is not a bonus on either resume. After countless other disasters, I found myself in treatment where one of the doctors that I couldn't con suggested I go to a 12-step recovery group, and when I got out, I did, and the seed to my recovery was planted. Treatment and 12 steps will ruin your using and your drinking. There is nothing worse than a head full of AA and a belly full of booze and drugs. But I still had a strong resistance to being told what to do by anybody, especially if it was good for me. Like most active addicts, I only liked advice if I agreed with it. But the seed was planted, and for the first time, I didn't feel alone. I could no longer deny that there was a solution to my problem. After all, there was a room full of people who had apparently found a way out. My terminal uniqueness was shattered, but I still wasn't ready. I still didn't see addiction as a physical, mental, and spiritual disease. I thought that as long as I could control the physical part, I would be okay. Boy, was I wrong. C.S. Lewis said that in our adversity, God shouts to us. Well, he had been screaming at me for years, but I wasn't listening. I had been trying to get sober, clean and sober for 10 years, and there wasn't anything I didn't try. Geographics, changing girlfriends, graduate school, shrinks, drug therapy, blocking agents, getting arrested, rehabs, locking myself in my house for a week at a time. I tried everything and nothing had worked. And if you had met me back then, you might have thought to yourself, you know, that Chris Lawford sure is a nice guy, and he's tried really hard to do something about this, but he's probably going to die. February 17th, 1986 was one of the coldest days ever recorded in the city of Boston, and I woke that morning with a dread like nothing I had ever felt before. I stood at my living room window looking out at the frozen city, stuck between knowing that there was a solution to my problem and the absolute certainty that I would never be able to access it. And that's when it happened. My moment of clarity that changed my life. What Carl Jung called my psychic change moment, or what Bill Wilson, the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, called my change of heart. I believe what happened that morning 32 years ago was a moment of grace which humbled me, allowing me to surrender and find the key of willingness. This didn't happen to me because I deserved it. It happened, I think, because in all those years of trying to get better, I did two things right. I didn't die, and I never lost my desire to get well. Up until the day I found recovery and my life changed forever, nothing seemed to be working. And indeed, this is often the headline to addiction, that any effort or investment is squandered, that it's simply not worth the time or effort to deal with someone with a substance use disorder. We should just lock them up or let them die. Standing here today, 32 years in recovery, I can tell you that this is not true. Getting a person into recovery is 1% initiation of abstinence, 1% acute detox, and 98% relapse prevention or aftercare. The idea being that once a person decides to stop using and is willing to take action, getting them detoxed is not difficult. The hard parts are getting them to want detox, then keeping them clean and sober. In the US, 95.5% of the estimated 21 million people who need but do not receive services for a substance use problem do not seek help because they do not recognize the need for help. Motivating people to seek help should be a much more robust part of treatment, rather than just hoping people will hit bottom and stumble into an ER. Techniques such as motivational interviewing, medication treatment, brief interventions in ER or doctor's offices and hospital settings have been shown to increase the chances of someone seeking treatment, but they are rarely used. We are pretty good at getting people clean. What we truly suck at is aftercare, i.e., recovery support after substance use has diminished or ceased. Not just for sobriety, but also to help folks get their life back. Work, health, regaining driver's licenses, custody of kids, finding stable housing, working on the underlying causes and conditions of their addiction, i.e. trauma and family of origin issues. That's what quality of life improvements and therefore sustained recovery and becoming productive citizens hinge on. And we are failing miserably at that. Treatment is not recovery. It's just the beginning. We need to spend more time and energy and resources on recovery support services that come after treatment to help people, to keep people in recovery longer, because the longer someone stays in recovery, the less likely they are to relapse and the more productive they become. Recovery support is often just a meeting list and a pat on the back. But recovery has to be more than peeing in a cup once a week and going to 12-step meetings. Recovery must be anchored in the real world, not ostracized or segregated by dictate or by choice. For people to want to stay in recovery, it has to be attractive. It has to be positive, something you want to get and something you want to keep. Those with struggling with a substance use disorder need to know that in recovery they can once again become productive members of society, that society values them and wants them back, if indeed society does. Do we really want people to recover? Really? If you're not personally affected by addiction, yourself or in your close circle, do you really care? Would more funding for recovery research or support be an issue you'd vote on in the next election? Until recently, our society's concern about addiction has boiled down to what we politely call public health and safety, meaning as long as they don't steal my wallet or transmit infectious diseases, we're good. Are we though? Are we good if 10% of the population who's typically dependent on drugs and or alcohol in any country, plus their family and community, are ravaged by the numerous consequences of this disease? Are we okay with that? Because if we are not, we need to wake up to the fact that we aren't doing a very good job right now. We must build awareness that sustaining the positive outcomes of treatment and other support requires the community to accept people back into their community and understand the importance of meaningful work as a critical part of that acceptance. Remember, there are 24 million people in recovery. That means your neighbors, your kid's teacher, your doctor, your lawyer, people you know. Recovery is everywhere. We just don't know it yet. And as long as we don't know it, as long as the pure joy of recovery remains a well-kept hidden secret in church basements, people will continue dying because they don't know there's another way. And society will continue to treat us as criminals and moral failures, and everyone loses. Research shows that people sought recovery because they were sick and tired of being sick and tired, and they wanted a better life. Their priorities are to have better health, better relationships, a better attitude, a job, a home. Getting clean and sober isn't the goal. It's a means to an end. The end goal is a better life. In recovery, we're not running away from our addictions. We're stepping into an amazing life, and that's what many of us get. Here's how it works. Studies show that in active addiction, stress is high and quality of life is non-existent. A team of researchers recently found that the quality of life of people actively using was lower than that of people waiting for a heart transplant. As recovery starts and progresses, stress goes down gradually and quality of life keeps getting better. Stress is the #1 predictor of relapse, and good quality of life is one of the key predictors of staying in recovery. So it becomes a vicious but delightful cycle where the longer you're clean and sober, the less stressed you are and the better life gets. So now, who wants to use and take a chance to lose it all over again? Of course, this also means that if you just quit using and nothing else changes, you're going back out. 2 months into my recovery, I was at a meeting on the Upper East Side of New York, and I was helping set up this meeting with this recovering guy. And I said to him, so this thing that we're doing here, you mean I can't have a drink for the rest of my life? And he looked at me and he said, well, I don't know. If there's a nuclear war or something, I guess all of us would have our cocktail. So in an instant, I had my caveat, my loophole. There could always be a nuclear war and I would get to have another drink. But then he looked at me as if he was peering into my soul, and he said with the conviction of that of the truly saved, he said, but if you do this thing, if you really do this thing, you're not going to want to use again because you're going to get a bridge back to life and it will be beyond your wildest dreams. All I had ever wanted was a purposeful life. This guy was telling me I would get that and it would be amazing. I came from folks who had what from the outside looked like lives beyond their wildest dreams, but the reality told me a different story. When I was 6, I visited my dad in Las Vegas at the Sands Hotel on the set of Ocean's 11, and I watched him and Uncle Frank and Dean and Sammy run around in those really cool suits with those skinny ties trying to steal all the money in the Vegas casinos. And I thought to myself, I want to do that one day. I want to grow up and do that, and I want to do it with my dad. Well, That never happened. The closest my father and I got to that kind of intimate collaborative camaraderie was the night of my 21st birthday at the Playboy Mansion when we shared a vial of cocaine. It was the best either of us could do at the time. My dad loved me a lot, but he couldn't do any better. My father and the rest of those guys I saw on the set that day of Ocean's 11 at the Sands Hotel had everything you could possibly want in this life. And all of them died directly or indirectly as a result of this illness. None of them were happy, and there was no peace at the end. Addiction had robbed them of pretty much everything. Recovery is not fear of relapse, and it's a lot more than working on your defects of character. The human brain has a magnificent capacity to relearn, to develop new neural pathways and change. And the more we do something, the stronger that brain pathway gets until the behavior, thinking pattern becomes habitual. And the less we do something or think in a certain way, the weaker that pathway becomes until the connection is basically extinguished. Obviously, recovery is more than changing the brain. We need to change people, places, and things, and that too becomes easier as we do it. In recovery, we not only learn new behaviors, but change the way we think and feel about the fundamentals of our lives by practicing these new thinking, behavior, socialization patterns. A person entering recovery may have low self-esteem and no substantial belief that they are capable of an exceptional life, but with new messaging and habits, along with the necessary life skills, a person in recovery can change their perception and accomplish great things. I spent 10 years trying to solve the riddle of my addiction, and the best I could do was to lock myself in my house or in a jail or hospital so I wouldn't use. When something frees you from that kind of hell, it definitely gets your attention, and if you're lucky, may reveal a sliver of willingness to change who we have become and how we navigate life. I believe all of us get these intermittent windows of opportunity for profound change. The reason I got to recovery was because I crawled through the window and realized once I did, there might not be another. Gandhi said the man who changes himself is greater than the man who conquers 10,000 armies. I think changing who we are is incredibly difficult, but that these periodic windows offer us a chance. The reason I stayed in recovery was because I stepped out of my active addiction long enough to demonstrate to myself my capacity to orchestrate a rich and meaningful life. I wanted to have what I saw those guys have that day at the Sands Hotel. The fun, the camaraderie, the shared work and purpose, the talent and the glamour, and have the ability to enjoy it. I wanted to find a way to engage the world that allows me to enjoy the good and tolerate the bad. It's having the life skills to be successful while accepting disappointments. It's finding one's authentic center and allowing my purpose to flow from there. It's a blend of the spiritual, emotional, and material from a solid core. Not everyone who finds recovery gets to the place I'm describing. In the process of peeling the onion of the causes and conditions of my addiction, I found that there are many levels, but there seems to be one level that is the mother of all levels of radical evolution of self. It's nasty, messy, and profoundly challenging. It demands not just acknowledging the fire, but demands that we walk into it, and many of us don't. It means facing your fears, challenging your beliefs, questioning every aspect of your life, acting out your fears and or your fantasies, whatever. It happened for me at 15 years of recovery. I blew up my life, did my 40 days and 40 nights, turned my back on everything I knew, and rolled the dice. It was painful and terrifying, and I was transformed. Many believe in our society that addicts don't have much to offer this world. The perception is that we are weak, have no willpower, are morally non-committal. I'll tell you what, you show me someone who has danced with the 800-pound gorilla of addiction while being punched in the face by said gorilla for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And I will show you one tough, willful, committed human being who can, in recovery, not only become productive and accountable, but can and often does become exceptional. Today in recovery, I have a life beyond my wildest dreams. My greatest liabilities have become my greatest assets. I contribute to society rather than take from society. I've learned how to be a committed and present father who's been intimately involved in my children's lives in appropriate ways. I'm an example to my kids that it is possible to overcome adversity and realize your dreams in spite of that adversity. I'm an example that you don't need drugs or alcohol to get through a bad day. They know I don't need to get high to have fun, to laugh until my belly hurts, dance like a wild man, have a world full of really good friends, fall in love with a beautiful, complicated, amazing woman in recovery, be respected and listened to by drunks and policymakers, and sometimes drunk policymakers. My children know it is possible to find the courage to show up on a set and shoot a scene with Sir Anthony Hopkins, write your first book when you don't know how to type, and give a policy speech at the UN, and change yourself for the better in middle age. I talk to them about where they came from and about their genetic legacy when it comes to this illness. They know my story and the promise, challenge, and wonder of a life lived in recovery. I am the father I am today because I'm in recovery. My dad, God bless him, died of this illness and spent the last 20 years of his life fighting it. He died when he was 60 years old. I got sober 3 months later. I don't think that's coincidence. I have a daughter, I don't know whether she made it here today, who, she was me. And because she had two parents who were paying attention, who were in recovery, intervened in her life, and she's celebrating 8 years of long-term recovery. Today, I have broken the chain of addiction in my family. After a lifetime of trying to be everything I thought people wanted me to be, I have found myself in all that I come from. I have changed everything in my recovery. Not all of it is good, and it sure isn't easy. Change is the vital essence of recovery. It's also thrilling, honest, expansive, and unpredictable. Change and authenticity is what I always wanted out of life. Today, I am exceptional, not because of my accomplishments or the things in my life, but because in recovery, I get to use my experience, strength, and hope to help others change their life if they want to. I'm going to answer some questions, but I want to thank all of you for showing up. It's amazing. I think 12 years ago when I started when I started my advocacy, this would not have happened. People just did not do this. They didn't show up. And treatment centers did not organize these kinds of things. So good for milestones and good for all of you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Christopher. That was absolutely incredible. Thank you for sharing your story and your expertise with us. Now we're going to open it up to the audience. If you have questions for Christopher, there is a microphone. I can't really see it, but there it is. It's right over there. If you have any questions, please line up by the microphone, and Christopher will be happy to answer them. And if you could please be mindful of time.
First of all, I want to say thank you. I really like your message. One thing that I want to ask you is, how do we brand the message? How do we get people to care that aren't directly affected by addiction? Because you talked about the hole, that has been opened up since the 60s when your uncle was in office, and I don't think that hole has closed. I think it's just gotten bigger. But how do we brand it? How do we get people to care?
It's a great question. I think first of all you got to think about us. So the 24 million people in active recovery, that's just from chemical dependency. That's just from drugs and alcohol. There's a bunch of other people who have gambling, food, smoking. I mean, there's 180 million people that are touched by this thing in one way or another. So there's a lot of people who understand. I think I'm not a marketing person, so really, but it's a great question. But the thing is to keep focused on our society.
Yeah.
And the time is going to do a lot of this. And I think one of the other things that I talk about, I didn't talk about it here, but building a world of recovery economically. So there's already beginning to see seeds of that, where people are beginning to, there's sober living, not actually those kinds of sober living, but where people build communities where they want to live in recovery with other people. There's sober car services. There's all sorts of stuff like that, and that's an important thing, because I think money is a big deal. It's a big deal in America, and it's a big deal to people like us. So we're not going to get out of bed if there isn't something on the other side of it. You know what I mean? The other thing I think we could do is, I've talked a lot about making recovery cool, because it really has to come from the bottom up. And I think I don't know how old you are,
18.
but you guys are the ones that are going to have to do it.
Yeah, because you know what? It's I see it in my generation. The burden is going to be on us now.
Yeah. You're up to it.
Yeah. No. And it's on us. It's on us.
Yeah.
And we're going to do it. But we need your guys' help.
Yeah.
And we need the money.
Yeah, we need
like
money.
You said, we need the money,
money.
because it's all ideas. It's all ideas, and it sounds good
right.
until it's actually helping people.
I was talking to my girlfriend Kyla, who's a little younger than me, but she was going online and she was looking for ways to donate money, and she said there's no places that focus on this illness.
Yeah.
To give money, and the reason is because the people that advertise for raising money they're making money, and they're not going to put us on there because we don't give.
Yeah.
The American Cancer Society raises $1 billion. We raise $20 million a year for a disease that's 3 times more impactful.
But
it's going to change, but it's going to take a while.
But listen, like that is like wow. But how do you get that, and how do you put that into a phrase? How do you put that on a hat? How do you? I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it, but I need help.
Amen.
You know what I mean?
It.
I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. I have the confidence.
Do it.
But I need to build the infrastructure. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Cool,
and we need a system.
Cool.
You know what I mean? So
cool.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks for the question. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I'm Kai. Nice to meet you.
You mentioned that you come from your background is Irish. I'm obviously a Brit, perhaps, so it's obvious to you.
I got half of that.
Right. So I didn't know until I came to Los Angeles that I had a drinking problem, because it's just a cultural thing.
Yeah.
In your work as an ambassador and a game changer, how, because recovery here is a safe space.
Yeah.
It's very rich, and there's somewhere to go on every corner. But it's still not even a conversation in the UK, for example. So what's your observation around changing that discussion on maybe even a global level?
Well, when I was appointed, they didn't have, at the time that I was appointed Goodwill Ambassador, they never had a Goodwill Ambassador for drug treatment and care issues. So I was the first. I don't know if they appointed one after me or not, but, they couldn't get it together. The UN couldn't get it together. They send like Angelina Jolie to Africa, and they do all this work with celebrities to get visibility. It's all about visibility. And people have asked me, they said, why, I've done a lot of work in Hep C, and why can't we replicate what's happening with HIV? Why can't we get that kind of urgency and creativity for this illness? And the answer is because, with HIV, first of all, we had what motivated, the group that motivated that were gay men who refused not to make it a priority. And we had serious political will because my Uncle Teddy demanded that the AIDS package was passed, and we had Ryan White, which was a kid who was sympathetic. We don't have any of those things present with this illness. We have no urgency from our people. We have no political champion, and we have no sympathetic figure or slogan or whatever. And so we're going to have to do it without those things. And what it means is we're going to have to do it internally. We're going to have to do it. I think, I mean, if you go to meetings and stuff like that, you know how hard it is to get people to put $2 in the basket. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? If it's hard for you to put $2 in the basket, how much are you going to extend yourself around these other things? Because it means really working at it and demanding and getting outraged. The Screen Actors Guild, of which I was a member, dropped their health insurance after the Affordable Care Act and the parity bill came out because it became too expensive because the parity bill forced insurance companies to reimburse for mental health issues at the same rates that they reimburse for physical issues, right? And it was too expensive for the Screen Actors Guild to do it. Can you imagine they dropped addiction treatment from their health plan and there wasn't a peep? Now, that health insurance is really important to a lot of people because people die to get their Screen Actors Guild health insurance and because they depend on it for their families. And a lot of those families have mental health and addiction issues in them. And they have nowhere to go now. And there wasn't an ounce of protest in a city where you could imagine there would be an outcry. Nothing. Nobody even knows about it. I mean, I talked about it at a meeting that was, 15 yards from where that happened. And people were like, what? People in recovery don't know there's a recovery month. We don't know anything. Because we're in church basements, staying sober and helping other people. Amazing stuff. And when you talk to people in those, there's over a couple million people that could be doing stuff. When you talk to people about it, they go, we maintain our anonymity at the level of press, radio, and film. Well, that's wrong, okay? It's wrong because we're not asking you to break your anonymity as far as your association with Alcoholics Anonymous or any of those 12-step programs. We're asking you to go out and talk about a person in long-term recovery. Bill Wilson testified in front of a Senate subcommittee in the 1950s saying that alcoholics should go out and talk about recovery because we know about recovery. Mm-hmm. Nobody does. Very few people do. There's a few. And I'm not saying it's for everybody. I don't think if you don't feel like you can do it because your recovery's at stake, don't do it. But there's plenty of people that could and they don't.
I will say I agree with you. I think it's a personal choice.
Absolutely.
I was a public figure in the UK, and on my 4th sober birthday, I felt very disconnected and dishonest not talking about my recovery because I'd actually built a business in recovery. Right. So it was my life.
Right.
And so I made a little film on the eve of my 4th birthday and I posted it and I couldn't look at it because I was terrified. But I just told my story and I said, I'm 4. And so the next morning I woke up and of course, with the time lapse in the UK, I was here when I posted it. And I opened up my Facebook and it had gone viral. And I never had one person say you're a loser. Everybody said, congratulations.
That's awesome.
Not one.
Right. Now, there are a lot of people who could not do that because it's too risky. And I understand that and I respect that 100%. Society's not there yet. I asked my son, he worked in a financial service, and I said, what if somebody is sober and, they have a drug thing? They go, if they have a relapse, career over. So it's a real problem for
That's right.
people, and I understand that, but for others, it's not. And
Yeah.
it wasn't for you, and you did something amazing.
I was terrified to cross
I'm
that
sure
line.
it's a hard
you
thing
know.
to do.
It was.
I was terrified when I started. When
Yeah.
I wrote that book and was public, my family, I'm like, what are they going to do to me? And 50% of them I don't talk to anymore.
But you know,
And those are the people in recovery.
I will just say, you know, it's my proudest achievement as well. You
Good
know,
for
I
you,
have
man.
children, I
Good
have
for
a
you.
grandchild, and
Yeah.
I'm awake and aware, and you know, disrupted a generational disease. So I'm so grateful and so
It's
proud.
awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to start and thank you for your great speech. You have a lot of great opportunities. You mentioned about
Right.
the politics that you come from and the great knowledge. They mentioned about the grassroots. I think everyone in this room, I think we start today because everyone has an opportunity to speak to somebody. And we all know that we know somebody, starting with you, that you know a lot of people in politics. Everyone cares. And how we start is grassroots, and we start grassroots today. Because it starts in this room.
Yeah, that's right.
And our politicians, our elected officials, they're people just like us. They know somebody that's hurting. And they're held accountable as well. So if we open their doors and we hold them and say, we're hurting, I think we can start moving that mountain today.
Up until now, the backbone of any movement that we've had, and wherever locally or wherever, has been with families.
Right.
And that's been amazing. The families have been amazing. But the truth is, once that family member that they care about either moves on in recovery or dies, that family doesn't have any interest in this anymore. This is a tough one. It's a lot different than anything else. There's years of stigma. You know, when NA started it, they called them rabbit meetings because it was illegal for addicts to congregate. There's a lot of stigma around this. And you know, I talked about in my speech, a lot of people in the world believe this is a disease, but a lot of them don't. They're still conflicted about disease versus weakness.
So you're saying that we can't sit down with
I'm
the
saying-
supervisor and educate them?
No, we can, absolutely.
And that'll
the good
begin the
news here,
process?
the good news here is things have changed dramatically in 12 years since I've done this. I'm not kidding you. This would never have happened 12 years ago. I've spoken in front of the American Correction Association, in front of prison guards. That would never have happened. There's a lot of good stuff going on, and it's going to continue. It's going to continue. But we have to educate ourselves first.
Right.
Before we go out there and worry about the normies, we've got to start talking to ourselves about what our responsibilities are in terms of someone that has this. I talked to Drew Pinsky because there's a lot of debate about what you tell your kids and blah, blah, blah. And I've told my kids everything. My kids read that I shot heroin. They thought that was cool when he was 11. And it worried me. But, he said to me, he goes, if you have this illness, you have an obligation to tell your children your story. And that's the truth. And many of us just don't. And the more we educate, education's the key here.
And that's what I'm saying is if we start in this room and educating ourselves, and
Right.
then we sit down and educate that supervisor, that city council member, that's how we begin to move that mountain, to open
Right.
those doors. Because if not, we're never going to move anywhere besides ourselves.
That's right. Right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jimmy. You appreciate it. Hey, man.
Hi there. So thank you very much. I agree with mostly everything you said. But I promised Denise that there would be at least one person here disagreeing with something.
Good.
Because I find that panels in America always
Good.
agree with each
Oh,
other
yeah,
and it gets boring.
disagree. Tear it apart.
So Ryan White died because he had a blood transfusion
Yeah,
and
that's
got
right.
AIDS.
That's right.
So no one's getting heroin addiction from medical procedures.
Right.
So I don't think the comparison is fair.
No, but all I'm saying was he was a sympathetic face for people who didn't know anything about this. And they're like looking at this little kid who had no complicity in this disease at all. No complicity at all. And he died from AIDS because of a drug transfusion. So, blood transfusion. So it just means we don't have anybody out there that we put on the poster that people go, oh man, I feel so bad. Let me give you money.
Well, who falls into addiction or alcoholism accidentally or innocently or by no fault of their own?
Tons of people. Everybody does. Everybody. Kids have no choice. You have no choice. If you have genetics and you have trauma, you're done.
In
You're
some
pretty
cases.
much done.
Not
Well,
in every case.
A lot of cases.
There's a lot of
a lot of cases.
So why isn't there a sympathetic face for this illness?
Because people really believe that at some point you have the volition to put the drink down or not pick up the drug,
Which
no
many
matter
of us
what
in
your
the-
history
which many
is.
of us in this room did.
Yeah, well, in 12-step programs, that's absolutely true. But what I'm talking about is that, and that message, by the way, is not a message that's heard out in the real world. Because we have no opinions on Southside issues. We don't go out there and talk about this.
Well, we should.
Yeah, that's
We
what
should.
we're talking about.
You know, but a lot of diseases, I don't think the rate of, spontaneous remission is as high as it is with addiction.
Hey, this is a good diagnosis. 60% of the people that have a substance use disorder achieve remission. 60%.
That's
60%.
tremendous.
Yeah, it's
16 or 60?
60.
60, yeah.
It takes 8 years, and there were 20 years of using, so it's 28 years to get there,
Right,
but they get there.
they do. You know, I will say one thing about Harvey Milk, the way he got that whole, sympathetic thing
Yep.
towards AIDS and homosexuality. He told all of his followers, he ended up being the mayor
Yeah, of San Francisco,
San
yeah,
Francisco. Not the mayor. He got shot before he became the mayor. When
Right. The mayor got shot and Harvey.
But he told those gay friends, come out, tell your family, let everybody know that everybody in the country knows a gay person. So similar to let everyone here come out and just mention it, whether it's on Facebook or
Right.
at your employment if you don't think you're going to get fired, in your family if you don't think you're going to get cut out of the will, whatever.
Right.
Yeah, just let
The
everybody
point
know.
is, there are a lot of good reasons why this is taking a long time to happen. They're not good in the sense that they would be good if
Right.
our society and our world was different.
Right.
But there's real things to overcome for us that were not there in other situations.
And I think
This
one
is
of-
more
one
difficult.
other situation is, I think, to some outsiders, it might look like a disease people love having until they don't. And we've heard so many
Yeah.
people in so many 12-step rooms talk about how this saved their lives growing up somehow.
That's right.
And not to any other diseases you can say save people's lives. So it's a very complicated issue.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
But if you're a real alcoholic and a real drug addict, you're not really having a good time for most of it.
No, not.
That's
once
the other message that doesn't
you
go
over
out-
that
doesn't get
invisible-
out there.
Once you hit that invisible line and you keep going.
That's right.
You're fucked.
It's not so
Okay.
good, yeah.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks. Hey,
Just something real short, Chris.
Yeah, yeah.
I think maybe it's not sympathy we need to teach compassion.
that's good.
And a
Yeah,
slogan I use is, behind every bad behavior is an unmet need.
That's great.
So if we
yeah.
can help people find the unmet needs, then we can find the compassion.
Thanks. There's a great, Kyla and I are reading this book. I mean, a lot of you probably have read it, but Gabor Mate is In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. If you cannot read that book and not weep. I mean, you understand what's driving this stuff for folks that do this to themselves. It's profound.
Hi there, thank you so much for
Thank you.
being here, and thank you to the panelists that are about to come talk to us, as well as Milestones. Quick question for you. So I am a grateful member of Al-Anon. I'm on the other side of
Yep.
this conversation. In this grassroots effort, how important do you think, when we talk about the family disease, that there is inclusion of the family in that recovery from a more clinical perspective, not necessarily the MAT and a rehab type of setting, but more in the intensive outpatient setting, cognitive behavioral therapies? One of the things that I think from my perspective is they say it's a family disease, but I wasn't the one being chased around 24/7 by a ton of clinicians until I wasn't using anymore, but I was
Right.
also sicker than my alcoholic and needed my own care. So you can't send your user back to the very same place where they got sick in the first place. So a lot of what you spoke a lot to my heart. I live it every day. Does your vision include something that's expansive beyond just
Oh,
the
without a
addict?
doubt. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, the family, I believe Codependence Anonymous is the graduate program of this whole thing. To be honest, I mean, I'm not kidding you. I mean, it says if you want to just get to 12 steps for a second, Bill Wilson wrote the root cause of our alcoholism is our defective relations with others. He wasn't talking about drinking. He was talking about us being able not to get along. And that's not just an alcoholic problem or a drug-addicted problem. We manifest it more clearly and more viscerally, but so I absolutely, and I think that's a great segue to get these other experts up here to talk about that, because the family is everything. The family is everything. When I was at the UN, there was this great a doctor there who ran the program, and he was the one who actually shifted from a source eradication program to education and prevention. And he basically said that and I interviewed him for my book, he said the most profound intervention is the family dinner table. That's it. And so if we can get there, we're doing pretty good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Should we do this? Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay, hi, I'm Tammy. I want to thank you for your experience, strength, and hope. I've been sober for 16 years myself, and I'm reading that book, The Hungry Ghost.
It's great, yeah.
The ghost with the big, big bellies that they need to fill and the teeny little
Yeah.
mouths. And I remember Dr. Mate stating that he talked to this heroin addict, this young girl, about the first time that she ever did heroin in her life and what it felt like. And she said it felt like a big, warm hug. And I think more people need to read his book. It needs to get out there.
Absolutely,
He could be
100%.
our poster person because
100%,
he shows
yeah.
that there is a medical model. You don't have a choice.
Yeah.
It is an illness. And the thing to do with the limbic system as you're growing up in this formative age, like 1 to 5, 6 years
Right.
old, you add trauma and that predisposition, and you got it. And they've already proven that alcoholics' brains work differently.
Right.
I mean, it's a physical thing, and we just got to push that medical model. And I think Gabor Mate is an excellent example.
It's interesting. Thanks for bringing that up. It's interesting because I was wondering, I asked my cousin to read that book, who's a sensitive guy, did a lot of analysis, but isn't one of us. And he got it and he read it, and he didn't, I asked him what he thought, and he liked it, but he didn't have the same kind of reaction that we have. So, because I thought if anybody read that book and heard about those lives and the courage and the will and the integrity that those folks live with and live without, they would melt, but not so. And that's what we're gonna overcome. Because the reason for that, I think, is because people are still conflicted on this issue of disease versus weakness.
Right. If you go to any EAP program through your employer and you need help with alcoholism and you go and get help, and once you relapse the first time you're out of there, if you have cancer and you go have chemotherapy and it doesn't work and you came out of remission and your cancer is full-blown again, you don't get fired because you need more chemotherapy.
Right. No.
And
Do you imagine getting thrown out of treatment? You get thrown out of treatment for a dirty urine. You imagine getting thrown out of your doctor's office
Yeah.
for having angina?
exactly.
I mean, that's insane.
And recently, I also heard in the news about this medication called naltrexone,
Yeah.
I believe. It's
I was
supposed to
on it.
stop the cravings.
Yeah.
Well, I know that most of us in this room are probably all about the 12-step, and that's it. How do you feel about medications such as that one?
For anything that people need to get better.
That's how I
And
feel
getting,
too.
I mean, absolutely 100%. I've been on all of it. I've been on methadone. I've been on naltrexone. I've done the whole deal. The best thing is being clean and sober, but not everybody can do it. And whatever, I gave a speech when I first started this, and it was very 12-step centric, and I gave it at a conference, a gambling conference in Las Vegas, and the guy who put it on was from Harvard, my mentor, really smart guy, one of the best guys, Howard Schaefer in addiction. And he came up and he said, Chris, I just want to tell you there are other strategies. I want you to tell you that methadone is the most significant intervention on the planet right now in terms of getting people from total despair and death to a place where they can function in their lives. So, and I went, yeah, okay, I see that. And we have to, in 12 steps, get a little bit more tolerant of other ways of doing it.
Yeah. we
Otherwise, we're going to
definitely
go
do.
away.
Right. And it's not going to support the medical model, which
That's
is what
right.
we need to do.
That's right.
And here, I will tell you one more thing before I sit down. This is how much of an alcoholic I am. I was sitting over there chewing gum. You know how sometimes you chew gum and you accidentally chew the side of your cheek and
Yeah.
you're like, oh, I better spit my gum out. I bit the side of my cheek and I went, oh, I'm not going to do it again. I kept chewing. Bit the side of my cheek. Well, I don't taste any blood. That's fine. Kept chewing the gum. It took about the fourth time, and all of a sudden I went, I taste blood. I think I need to spit out my gum. Normal people don't think this way.
That's right.
I am medically, I'm
Right.
different, and I know it.
Right.
And I'm all for anything that can help someone get sober. It's not just the 12 steps. Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, the whole big problem with it's anonymous. And that's why we don't have a face
It's
out
great
there.
the way it is. There's a lot of reasons for that, and one of the reasons the stigma of being us is not so much, but holding one hand out to another and having that connection, an anonymous connection, is a spiritual revolution, and it should be maintained. But those of us who are in these rooms can go out and be public about being a person in long-term recovery and change the world, and we can do it.
Yeah.
We can do it.
I see your point. I want to be one of those
Cool.
people.
Yeah,
Thank
cool.
you.
Thank you.
Hi, Christopher. One quick thing, and thank you to Milestones. My name is
Yeah.
Mary. I'm a recovering alcoholic. And advocacy for the family. I love it that you said that. And every family member who's sitting here today, they can raise awareness by talking to other people, and that stigma will go away
Right.
when we talk as a community. And one of the things in my work at Betty Ford over the years in working with families was community is immunity.
Right.
When we work as a community. And I love the work that, and the people that are here today,
Yeah.
to hear your message that we can stand strong. And as a recovering mother and as a absentee mother, I was a sober mother on the weekends and didn't have the full custody of my kids, but advocated all throughout my whole recovery. So I'm glad you said that. We have to speak up, and I keep talking, just like you do and other folks here. We have to keep the message strong. Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Do this?
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was incredible.
Do you want me to speak?
I think this one. Okay, this one works. Thank you, Christopher. That was incredible. Thank you. And this is really about you guys and the questions you have, and I love what you have to offer, and let's keep it going. Starting this conversation is what this is all about tonight, to hear from you, to hear what you're needing. This is about education, support, and resources, so thank you. I have the honor of introducing our extraordinary panel. And everyone I'm about to introduce is so well loved, appreciated, and known in our community for their extraordinary work. So I'm actually going to read their bios and ask them to come up one by one to have a seat. And then again, we would love to hear from all of you about what's going on and what we can do to help better. So the first person, Denise Klein. Denise Klein is the CEO of Milestones Ranch Malibu. Denise has been a social worker for 28 years. She began her career as a family advocacy therapist for the Grand Forks Air Force Base in North Dakota. She continued her work with Lutheran Social Services, serving many families in rural America for 5 years before moving to Colorado and starting Inner Choice Family Counseling Center, where she and her team focused on preventing out-of-home placement for children and keeping families together. Denise is now proudly working side by side with her daughter, Savannah, who is also a social worker, and also with an incredible heart-centered team of very dedicated professionals at Milestones Ranch, Malibu. It is at this time in history, with the epidemic of addiction waging its war on our health and our country. Denise borrows a quote from an expert addiction doctor named Gabor Mate, which she believes says it all. Not why the addiction, why the pain? Why is America in so much emotional pain, and how do we support our communities in a more profound way? Hence, the vision for this evening. So now I'd love to welcome Dr. Judy Ho. Dr. Judy Ho is a double board certified licensed clinical and forensic psychologist and tenured associate professor of psychology at Pepperdine University. Dr. Judy received her Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology and Bachelor of Science degree in business administration from UC Berkeley, and her Master's of Science and PhD in clinical psychology from the San Diego State University, University of California, San Diego Joint Doctoral Program. She completed a postdoctoral fellowship at UCLA Semel Institute and is a 2-time recipient of the National Institute of Mental Health's National Resource Services Award. Dr. Judy's clinical experiences include working in inpatient psychiatric settings, outpatient hospitals, and clinics, in forensic settings as an expert witness in criminal and civil proceedings, and in public schools and special education classrooms. Her private practice work centers around neuropsychological and forensic assessments and evidence-based cognitive behavioral therapies. She is chair of the GPS Institutional Review Board at Pepperdine and maintains an active research lab where she focuses on psychoeducation and treatment for high-need populations, and regularly publishes in her peer-reviewed research journals, contributes chapters, and serves as editor on various books. Her current book project, a self-help book based on scientific principles entitled, "Why Did I Do That? Stop Self-Sabotage, Transform Your Thinking, and Begin Living Your Best Life," will be published by HarperCollins in August 2019. Dr. Judy regularly appears on various television programs as an expert psychologist. After serving as guest co-host on season 10 of The Doctors on CBS, she is now the co-host of the CBS syndicated daytime talk show, Face the Truth, a show that aims to provide meaningful and helpful solutions for people presenting with various emotional and psychological struggles, which premieres September 10th. Dr. Judy pursues her media work with the goal of providing information to the general public about quality mental health care and to reduce stigma towards mentally ill individuals and to encourage people who need help to seek effective treatment. The next person I would like to welcome is Robert Schultz. There you are, Robert. Robert Schultz is first and foremost a husband and father and lives locally in the Conejo Valley. He is duly licensed as a professional clinical counselor and marriage and family therapist. Currently, he is focusing on his specialized therapy practice, training, and consultation services through Engage in Westlake Village. Robert has extensive experience and expertise in the field of addictive behaviors, college mental health, sports psychology, marital and family therapy, and men's health concerns. Robert has served in many leadership roles over his 20-plus years in the field, including most recently as the Chief Clinical Officer and Clinical Director at Engage in Westlake Village. And before that, a decade at Pepperdine University's Counseling Center, an adjunct professor in their Graduate School of Psychology. Robert is a member of the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers and has provided consultation and training services to many private and governmental agencies and conducted hundreds of trainings locally and nationally for professionals in the fields of mental health, higher education, and community corrections. He co-authored the book, Engaging Resistance, and has authored several publications on the topic of men in therapy and motivational interviewing. The next person is Kurt Garby. Love to welcome Kurt Garby. There you are, Kurt. I'm too short to stand behind the podium. You wouldn't see me, so I'm going to stand right here. Kurt Garby is an important resource for families and clients searching for a specific treatment program. Kurt has over 30 years of experience in the chemical dependency and mental health fields. He served as the Director of Crisis Intervention and Admissions at ASAP Family Treatment Centers and as Director of Admissions and Referrals at Anacapa by the Sea. He has worked as a marketing consultant for the last 15 years and represents PCH, Visions, and Cottage Residential. Kurt holds a Master of Arts in Marriage Family Counseling from Pacific Oaks in Pasadena. Thanks, Kurt. Next, I would love to welcome Burr Cook. There you are. Burr Cook began his career in healthcare in 1976 and has been working exclusively in the addiction recovery field since 2002. Burr has worked as a counselor, detox nurse, family program developer and facilitator, program director, and executive director. Burr is the owner of Family Intervention Now, a private intervention practice, and is the executive director at Balboa Horizons, a long-term, gender-specific residential treatment facility. Burr has lectured nationally on addiction and recovery-related topics and currently facilitates weekly family recovery workshops, providing a community resource that takes a systemic approach to dealing with addiction. Burr is a registered nurse, a state and nationally certified addiction counselor, a certified intervention professional, a member of CADAC, and the past president of the Network of Independent Interventionists. Welcome, Burr. And last, but of course not least, Dr. Timothy Fong. Dr. Fong is a professor of addiction psychiatry at the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior at UCLA. He is the director of the UCLA Addiction Psychiatry Fellowship, a one-year program that provides clinical training in the management of addictive disorders. He is also the co-director of the UCLA Gambling Studies program. The purpose of this program is to examine the underlying causes and clinical characteristics of gambling disorder in order to develop effective evidence-based treatment strategies. Finally, he is a faculty advisor to the UCLA Cannabis Research Initiative, a multidisciplinary effort to examine the full impact of cannabis in the body, mind, and brain. So our panel is incredible, to say the least. And now I would love to open it up to everyone in the audience. If we could shine the light on the microphone. Thank you. Please feel free to come up and line up and ask our incredible panel some questions that you may have. We welcome all questions and are so excited to answer them.
Hi, I'll start off for a second. Denise, how do we make treatment more financially available to those who normally don't have the kind of money that it takes to do typical Malibu treatment?
You start off with the easy questions. Thank you, Dr. Trudeau. Well, I think all of us probably have some thoughts about that, and it definitely has to happen. There isn't a family that I know of that isn't touched by the epidemic of addiction and all the pain and suffering that comes with that. And so I have been talking with colleagues and strategizing and discussing ways of making it more affordable so that we can do something. I think for now what we have to do is really, when a person doesn't have the financial wherewithal to go to a dual diagnosis program, and I want to put a bookmark on that and say there are so many programs that I know of. There isn't one program in Malibu that doesn't do sliding fee scales too, whenever they can. There's so many good-hearted people offering discounts. But if that isn't available, is to definitely make calls to social workers, and they will make, they have good resources. There's good programming going on at Claire and Tarzana, and very insurance-friendly. And I love what Chris said, which is the aftercare. So go get stabilized and get the support you need, get the structure you need, and then find a really great therapist and meetings, fellowship, and really put your, if you do have resources, find a therapist that believes in you. I have seen miracles happen with a therapist who has hope in their heart for their patients and can work with them and believes in them. And I've seen miracle after miracle. And again, backing up what Robert says, is the motivational interviewing is a key component of it. It's that kind of approach meets the client where they're at and really inspires them to engage in self-regarding behaviors. So I hope that helps. Anyone else want to respond to that? Thank you for the question.
Just want to say that sounds good, but I have been fighting for years for my granddaughter. We've had a young man die in our bathroom with an overdose. My granddaughter is still fighting, and I have begged, I have pleaded, I have gone any place I could go. I've lowered myself to anything I could do to get help for her, and I got nothing. So I can only say, it's nice to be able to have places, it's nice to be able to say those things, but when nobody will help you, unless you have money to pay, nobody will help you. They want your insurance card first, not the person first. It's an awful place to be, let me tell you.
What I would say to that is you keep asking, and you call us, and we will help you find a place. We'll work it out. If it's, we'll help you, we'll find support for your family. I promise, okay? Keep the faith. We're here for you, I promise.
Grateful Al-Anon member here. Hi, everybody. That cut me to the heart. And this actually goes out to Kurt. You are the one that reaches out for families with help. You are the ones that help them find help. How do we solve for this? I mean, we talked about, again, what Chris said, right? There's the 1% of abstinence, there's the 1% of getting straight, and the 98%, if you can stop people from dying in bathtubs by treating the family first, in some of these things, this is what has to change. I come from healthcare policy. I know exactly what they're talking about. I live it every day. Unfortunately, I get paid to do some of those things. There are grassroots efforts. Every major corporation has an opioid effort that they're advertising today. Why are you guys in this care delivery space not partnering with some of the big insurance companies and saying, hey, You want to reduce opioid crisis? Let us be a part of that. And you bring us people who need the help, despite your stupid medical policy that gets in the way. So Kurt, I'd actually turn it over to you and then ask anybody to engage there, because that is where it starts, right there. Before they're in ERs, before they're dying in bathtubs, before they're losing children, wives, and other people. Start with the family, get to the addict.
Can you hear this? Okay. Unfortunately, there was funding at one point for a lot of the lower cost programs and all of that. And unfortunately, a lot of that is dried up. There are low cost programs that have some sliding scales. Unfortunately, there's usually pretty significant waiting lists. Obviously, there's different when it's more mental health than chemical dependency. There's programs out there, but you have to keep calling and you have to keep trying, and you can't get up. You're more than welcome to call me, and I'll see what I can do to help your family.
There was going to be a little bit more response on that one. I just want to start by saying this right here, I think, is so important. And it's so important to have the community involved and have people coming together that are focused on the solutions for all of this. And I'm a parent of 3 girls. I'm also a therapist. I work in addiction. And one of the things that I find is that we are not doing what you guys are doing now. So I just want to say, coming together and having those solutions for people, I think, is huge. And one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of is children at this point. I've got a daughter that is in high school, and I'm seeing a lot of parents just thinking it's okay for them to be vaping. It's okay for them to be smoking pot. It's all right for them to be drinking at home. And what I'm seeing is that snowballs. My one daughter lost a lot of friends from that. So how can we address this mass consciousness of it's okay? And parents want to be friends. Parents want to, it's as long as it's in my home, it's all right. I see what they're doing and I know that they're all right. So as a collective, how do we all come together? What would you say? How do we make that the bigger message of the solution of how kids can stop this? I see that you're shaking your head. Yes, please.
I grabbed the mic first. This is a common observation, I think, with a lot of the families that walk into my office. And it's sort of this trying to move against the culture of sort of accepting that this is this is status quo. This is what's going to happen. My kid's going to drink, my kid's going to smoke a little weed, and sort of we've accepted that as okay. Rather than sort of seeing it as, I sometimes draw the comparison between, if you saw your kid having the flu and starting to show some signs that they were physically ill, would you just let them go out and not have any response or intervention to it, or take them to the doctor? And most parents would say, of course not. I would stay home with them. I would help them get some help. But for some reason, we view this differently. We view early alcohol and drug abuse in use in a way that we sort of want to turn our eye to it. So I think it's sort of empowering parents that do feel like you feel, that have a really strong feeling that this is not okay to stand up. I've had parents say they have been ostracized at times because they have stood up and stood out, because they have been the parent that's wanted to call and see if there's parents at the home where the party's occurring, and their kids don't like it. But I will say that those are the parents that oftentimes are the ones protecting their children, and that there are more parents out there like you, or I think like you, but they're silenced, or they feel like they can't speak up. But it's a huge challenge.
That was great, Robert. Thank you. That was a great question, and I think, as Robert mentioned, I see this all the time too, in my practice, in people that I work with, particularly with this younger generation. And I do think that part of the issue does stem from the fact that when you look at
the way that people have been sort of in general culturally parenting this younger generation. It's sort of this idea of like wanting to protect them and not letting them fall, you know, sort of this idea of participation trophies, you know, this idea that it's, you know, it's not okay that sometimes you don't get what you want. Well, I think that that has somehow extended to the people who have sort of this underlying drive to avoid any kind of distress or emotional difficulty. And alcohol and marijuana, they seem harmless. They're easy ways to temporarily escape that sort of emotional distress. And then culturally, we see that that's sort of been okay and everybody's doing it, and then they don't have the need to develop any other coping strategies to deal with their problems. And so I do think, as Robert said, that it does start with empowering the parents, but I think it also means educating our younger core group of people as they're growing up to learn different ways to deal with disappointment, to learn different ways to know that emotions are not scary, that they're transient, they're like waves in the ocean, they come and go, and anything that is of value, you're going to encounter stress and difficulty in that sort of pursuit. And so I feel like that's been something that I've been trying to talk about with the families and the younger people that I'm working with, especially if I see that their alcohol and drug use, while seemingly very like social and nonchalant right now, is being driven by the fact that they're trying to escape their problems, and that's been like a key for them to continue to go to it.
As long as I have your attention, I have questions. So the other question that I have is, I work in addiction. And one of the things that I see with across the board of a lot of the clients that come in is there's this family system, right? And the person that has the problem, the person who is drinking too much, doing too much drugs, whatever that is, they're the problem. So they're going into treatment. And I have to say, across the board, when I see that the family dynamic understands that they're the bigger problem, that is a key in everybody getting more support, more help, and helping that person understand it's not all them, it's everybody. So if you guys could talk to that, I think that's a huge subject. Yes?
I'll take this. Can you hear me? Okay. You know, as Christopher mentioned this when he was talking, a lot of this we're going to do at the level of press, radio, and films. A lot of this we're going to do on an individual basis. For about 8 years, I've been doing a community resource, working with small groups of families. I'm not going to change the world. The changes that we're going to see are going to happen over time, and some of these younger people, like that first gentleman that shared, they're going to be doing it standing on our shoulders. But we have to be able to talk about this. You know, one of the rules of addiction is don't talk about it. We see this in the family system. Well, in the bigger system, we have to talk about it. And it's going to be an uncomfortable conversation for some. It's going to be a needed conversation for others. I'm not going to change the world, but I know that I've changed the lives of a couple hundred people over the years. And look how many people there are in this room that work in this industry. Devoting a couple hours of your time each week, you could make a tremendous impact.
Obviously, if you work with an individual and don't involve the family, if you don't change the system that they're going back to, it typically doesn't take well. Good example, I work for an adolescent program called Visions, and it's mandatory that the families agree to doing the family component, because we know if we don't change mom and dad and junior goes back to the same system, nothing's going to change. And so it doesn't really matter if you're treating an adolescent, a young adult, or even an older adult. Anytime you can engage the family in the actual treatment, you're going to have a lot more success.
One of the mysteries in addiction psychiatry is why we don't involve the family from the start. If you had cancer, if you had a broken leg, you had diabetes, the spouse, the family members are in the room talking about treatment and asking questions. Last week, my son had just an issue with his finger, and I was there talking to the orthopedic surgeon. What does this mean? What happened? So I know as an addiction psychiatrist, when families come into the office together and we do the treatment together, prognosis is better and care is better. But for me, as an addiction psychiatrist, I was taught early on confidentiality, privacy, don't share anything, everything stays in the room, and that's the problem. So one of the things that we're trying to do is reverse that on the education side, is from the medical standpoint, if it truly is a medical model and medical condition, it has to involve everyone who's impacted by this, including the family. So when I have patients come into the office, say, when you come in for your first appointment, I'd really like you to bring a family member or a friend to that appointment. And the client ultimately will say, no, I can't do that. I'm ashamed to do that. And I'll say to them, that's your choice, but if you don't bring someone in, your care will not be as effective. That is a hard thing. It took me 20 years to really come across to do that. And until we actually do that, then we're not going to normalize it. So a couple things, now that I have the mic, I can actually rant and rave for a few things, but really some unbelievable stuff here, and there's so much to unpack. I met Christopher a few years ago. He gave me a copy of his book. I still give it to medical students from time to time. It's well worn and a lot of really great messages in there. He's very humble, so I really encourage people to read that. It's a really wonderful thing. I actually came up with 2 slogans tonight, and they're a little kitschy, but I think they work. One is Make America Recover Again. Mara, okay. And the second one, I know Chris may have left you, and he probably uses it already. It's that ask not what recovery can do for you, but what you can do for your recovery. So he can patent that, he can steal that from me, but I think that's very, very good. And I really have some really basic take-home messages, I think. Oftentimes people say, well, what do you really do as an addiction psychiatrist? What happens when the doors close? Well, if you really want to know, I'm going to have to charge you $500, but we're not going to do that. But the truth of the matter is, what happens when the doors close is we become human. And answers are had, solutions are made, but I oftentimes don't know the answer. I oftentimes don't know what will happen. I often worry and cry with my patients. I don't know. We don't have all the answers, absolutely. But when the doors close, that is the key, is that what you're going to get when you see an addiction psychiatrist or an addiction medicine specialist is evidence-based treatments. Again, the mystery that we see is that in our clinic at UCLA, we don't have a waiting list. Can you believe that? UCLA Addiction Psychiatry Clinic, we have appointments available this week. That doesn't sound right, does it? And we have women and men and families who are literally asking around to find out where can they get help and treatment. There's a huge disconnect from finding help, from finding credible help, and finding evidence-based treatment in this world. And unfortunately, our field of recovery and addiction treatment has been tainted by greed and lack of ethics and lack of regulation because we are a young field. 100 years ago, the year 1918, many of us couldn't even be in this room, right? Not only legally, but just wouldn't be allowed here. So we have to recognize that patients, and then 100 years from now, we will go a long way in the field of addiction and recovery. But we're not patient. We're not a patient society, and we want answers instantly. I think that's a real problem. So we have to be more patient in what we do. Number 2, and I think I say this all the time, we really have to be just more simple and humane to one another. And I think that's what's so difficult. So when patients say to me, how do you do what you do? And I say, well, it's because I enjoy it. It's because I like what I do. I love what I do. And when doctors say to me, how do you work with those patients? I say, well, how do you work with those patients that you work with? So when something as simple as, for me, staying awake, returning my phone calls, returning my emails, and carving out an hour out of my each day to answer people who have questions, as simple as that is incredibly difficult. A lot of people call me and text me, and I don't get back to them, and I wish I could. So my mantras are very simple. Stay simple, stay human, and enjoy each other, and try and build those community. If you were to spend an hour inside a session with me, what are we going to focus on? We're going to focus on home. We're going to focus on health. We're going to focus on self-care. We're going to focus on purpose. And we're going to focus on community. We're not going to focus on medications. We're not going to focus on all those other things. We're going to talk about simple things that make people's lives better. But do I believe medications are absolutely a critical and crucial part of recovery? Yes, but not for every single case. They're oftentimes way underused in cases where they should be used, and they're way overused in cases that shouldn't. So that's been part of my challenge, is how do I get the medical community to be doing this in a much more thoughtful, practical, and very simply humane and effective way. So those are my very simple mantras for the evening.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brenda, and I'm a friend of Denise and Milestones, kind of an ambassador at large. And I'm really excited you guys are here, and the name of this lovely event is called Fact or Fiction, The Truth About Addiction. And I really, truly believe the heart of this panel is this woman right here. I'm probably going to cry because I have such a compassion for families that suffer. And I think this woman, Bonnie, and her experiences are why we're here. And my question to you guys is, I believe she's suffering and her family is suffering because they don't have the money that people in Malibu have. And I think the fact part of this is that we need to find a way to help people with no money. So I open this to every one of you, and I would like to hear from every one of you what you think. How do we help people today, not tomorrow, not next week? What can we do to keep the faith? What are the action items we can do to help someone with no money? Right, Bonnie? This is what we need to do, you guys. How do we do it? How I get asked all the time, Brenda, I know you have friends in addiction. I can't afford a Malibu rehab. How do I get my cousin, my aunt, my uncle help? Please, anybody, what can we do to that? What do we say to those people?
A lot of the people I know that work in treatment, that have treatment centers, do have scholarship beds. Oftentimes there is a waiting list, but there are indigent treatment centers. There's some in my area that we use and we refer to. I think, the easy answer is familiarize yourself with those resources. So because you are going to come into contact with people, and if you've got a good resource list, you can make some referrals. Everybody can make an impact doing that by familiarizing yourself what is available in the area.
So is there a place for people like Bonnie to go that I'm not probably aware of, to go find a resource list? How would you find it? How would you get a resource list?
Well, a lot of us have them.
No, I meant for like someone like Bonnie who doesn't know, she probably didn't even know there was a thing called a resource list. And I'm definitely on your side. I'm not being, aggressive here, but I just want to know how these people like Bonnie and her family can get stuff, get help.
Like Kurt said, keep asking the question. Kurt actually offered to help her.
Yeah.
By getting in touch with them afterwards, I'd be happy to talk to her and put her in touch with some people as well.
And what do we
But
say?
as professionals, I think that we should all have those resource lists because we're getting those calls.
Yeah.
We're talking to those people every day.
So we just like go on the internet and put in like resources for treatment and find that
No,
information?
talking to professionals.
Oh, okay.
Many professionals, there's a lot of them in this room, have resource lists and do make referrals when somebody is calling for a service or a need that they can't fill at the moment or don't have, it's not what they do.
Okay.
But because we get these calls, we do have people that we can refer them to.
LA County has over 450 substance abuse treatment programs that are licensed officially. And as an analogy, I had a problem in our house today where our air conditioner wasn't working. And so how do I go get help to get that air conditioner fixed? I go to Yelp, and someone was out there within an hour.
Right.
That resource does not exist for substance abuse treatment or mental health properly.
Exactly.
psychologytoday.com is probably one of the best internet resources where you can go on and find people who have outpatient treatments and things like that. But frankly, it starts, if you have no money, but you have a desire to get better, you have to start making calls. You have to start asking. You have to go into 12-step rooms. You have to go to places like Bet Shuva or Tarzana Treatment and say, I have no money and I have no resources and I need a name of where I can go. Unfortunately, every case is so unique and so different that there literally are, if you go to an internet site and find a 5-star review, it may end up being a 1-star experience for you.
Right.
We can't know. It means going into your current Rolodex of people you know, whether it be at the church or school or your primary care doctor or a neighbor or someone in your family who's been through it, and asking, I need help. I'm stuck. I have no resources whatsoever. The larger question comes back to this definition of what kind of society do we want to create? We've created a society that benefits those who have resources, time, wealth, and who are very well connected. We do not have a set of insurance companies or state legislators or regulations to benefit all of us. So that's really puzzling and it's baffling. It still struggles for me when at UCLA we turn people away even though we have enough riches to cover, years and years of treatment, but we're not allowed to do that. So it starts with asking for help, documenting, and shouting it out from the rooftops. If you have no money and you have no idea where to turn, no one will know unless you ask for help or go to resources. And again, it just has to be a lot of those things. So I think part of the struggle, when you just Google addiction treatment Los Angeles, you get a lot of noise and you get a lot of uncertainty. And unfortunately, this is the truth, is that I, as a healthcare practitioner and provider, it's very difficult even for me to sort out who's real, who's credible, what's snake oil, what's going to prey on me versus what is absolutely the gosh honest truth. I had a guy yesterday who literally came into my office, knocked on my door, said, I want to see you, I'm dying for treatment. My first response was to call security. That's not what I want to do. He needed help. He didn't know how to get help. I said to him, are you looking for treatment or are you looking for what? He said, I just need help. I took him aside. I asked him to make an appointment. I saw him today. He's on his way for treatment. He didn't know. So he took the time to come down and knock on my door. But that's not what most people do. So it starts with getting informed and actually picking up the phone, which is a free call, and calling people, and hopefully someone will answer.
Thank you.
I'd like to add to that too, is we do have a responsible resource guide that we put together.
Great.
That's in the room next to us.
Great.
And also, I'm sorry for that experience that she had. If that is how that call was handled, without giving any resources or any support or TLC or hand-holding, then it wasn't the right treatment center. And the treatment centers on this list will do it, and we work collaboratively. I've worked in the field for 30 years. There isn't one person on this panel or on that list that wouldn't help her granddaughter find a bed.
I do believe that.
That's the truth.
Yeah, I do. I absolutely do.
So we created lists for everyone to
Great.
take home.
Great, thank you.
Hi, my name's Terry Carroll, and I do work in this field, but I come here today. I'm the mother of a recovering heroin addict, a daughter. I'm going to give some hope, make some statements, and then ask a question. Some hope, my daughter, well, first of all, there's always hope for addicts, and it's always free, and it is in rooms of 12 steps, and it's always available. My husband and I paid for 2 treatment centers for my daughter. She went to 5. It took her 4 years to get sober. She's now 6 years clean. Thank you. She's also 1 of 5, so the other 4 I don't have. So I do believe in that component of it's a disease and it's genetic and other reasons for it. Anyway, for Balboa Horizons was one of the treatment centers that gave her a bed and a scholarship. She also went to Yellowstone. She went to a lot of different centers that gave her scholarship beds, and she did it when I stepped out of the way And she went to the treatment centers and said, I want help. When I went and said, get her help, they said, okay, pony up. Because it really mattered more when she was the one that came and said, I need it. And they said, here's someone that wants it. Let's give it to her. So that's what I found. And the other thing that I have a question or a statement on is, addiction, it's different for over 18. And with our kids, when we get these young kids and we try to help them when they're using and vaping and that kind of thing, being able to help parents understand the behaviors and not the scary word addiction. Because we don't know if these adolescents are going to become addicts or not, So it's different. And how do we talk to the different family members when we have those different ages? And the question I have is, I'm surprised, and I want to know why treatment centers didn't have a big uproar when the question of legalizing marijuana came up. I really thought that that would be a huge thing that treatment centers might, step up to. And how do you guys feel about the legalization and what it's doing and what we're going to see down the line? Big size.
How I feel about it personally is I know that we're going to see more problems because of it. Not everybody that uses a substance becomes addicted or has a problem. I think the more important question is, what are parents telling their children? What are parents allowing? I hear parents rationalizing all the time. If they can do it here in the house and we can keep an eye on it, and this goes to the denial that is systemic in this country.
Yeah, and I found a lot of times that it is often a parent or an uncle or somebody else who has the addiction in the family, and that's why they don't want to make waves about it or actually talk about it because they don't want to be exposed. So yeah, how do we talk?
Sometimes they just don't want to have conflict.
Yeah. So how do we talk to parents of adolescents when not everyone will become addicted and they used themselves when they were growing up and it wasn't a big deal?
Well, and here's the thing, and that's in part why we created the UCLA Cannabis Research Initiative, because this is a big deal. So some of the things I've learned over the last year and a half in building this program is, number one, no cannabis for anyone under 21. That's it. That's it. Number two, respect the power and potency of the plant. The therapeutic potential is there, but we're not there yet. So number one, the reason why, in my world, why treatment programs haven't said, the cannabis treatment program of the West, come here for all your cannabis addiction treatment needs, is number one, we don't know what kind of treatment will work for cannabis use disorder. We do not have an FDA-approved medication. We do not even have any clear kind of behavioral treatments that are science-based for cannabis use disorder. The irony is that in LA County, the number one drug why people enter into treatment is cannabis. Right. So it is definitely there. But the more simple question is, why is it so popular? Why do people love cannabis? Why is the demand so high? Again, is it because of the world we live in, because it's so much stress and anxiety and it's so easy? Is it the popular culture? I don't know. It's a mixture of all those things.
For about a minute, right?
But we are at the beginning. Now the question is, 15 years from now, will we be talking about the cannabis epidemic like we're talking about the opioid epidemic? I don't think so. I hope not. But I didn't think we would be talking about the opioid epidemic 15 years ago either. So I think we have to be very mindful. I think what's different this time around is that there is state support, and with the proper form of research and evidence-based medicine, maybe we can prevent that. But again, no cannabis for anyone under 21. I just do not see any legitimate medical need, and I do not see any recreational need for cannabis for anyone under 21. People would say, well, that's ridiculous, you don't understand. I said, no, I understand what the power of what a substance will do when it's introduced to a young person's brain. When the first time you take it, there's a 9% chance of developing an actual addiction from that. That's serious business. So we've minimized that. One of the things that Christopher Lawford mentioned, again, we do not have a generational movie that showcases recovery, period. When I think about HIV, what do we think about? Philadelphia. When I think about addiction, it's still Pineapple Express, Cheech and Chong. Girl on a Train, Rachel Getting Married, box office bombs. So until we have that generational movie that really alters the landscape, cannabis will become part of people's daily experience. 1 out of 7 Americans used cannabis in the last 30 days. 1 out of 7. It will surpass opiates, it will surpass alcohol, it will surpass tobacco. But again, very simply, that's why I don't think the treatment programs have gotten into it. Because either A, we don't have treatments that work, and B, there hasn't been yet a market yet to say, can we make money as the cannabis treatment program of the West? So that hasn't happened yet.
I meant it more like, I mean, it's interesting, you bring up a good point. You know, we didn't think there would be an opiate epidemic, and for the gentleman who said that people don't fall into addiction, I think the epidemic of opioids disagrees with that. You know, people were prescribed a medication and became addicts. And we do know that there's a cannabis use disorder. So why, before it was legalized, is my question, didn't we say, hey, this is going to happen. This is going to be a use disorder, and we can help you guys see. I think right now people really are under the deception that it's safe.
Terry, if I can jump in there. And I think it speaks to the narrative that's getting sold is not the narrative that we see coming into our offices as healthcare providers. You know, working on a college campus for many years, those last 5+ years, and in the last 3 years in the community, the increase in cases where we're seeing kids that are coming into treatment, not necessarily because they have an identified cannabis problem, but because they've had a major psychotic break induced by cannabis, which has led then to either a long-term recovery from the psychotic episode or triggered some other longer-term psychotic disorder. Lost in that discussion oftentimes is the cannabis, is what I find. So I think sometimes, even though we're seeing the data is coming out in terms of the significant increase in ER visits for our youth that are coming into emergency rooms because of, you know, drug-induced psychosis across the country, we're not talking about that. That's not the story that's hitting the headlines. So somehow that needs to get out.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Monica, and I work with Denise at Milestones. I recently started working there a few months ago, and I've learned so much about addiction and the different treatment and stuff that it has really opened my mind to see that this is something that has been in my family for generations. But just like it's been said, this was never addressed as a problem. It was just something that happened to somebody in the family. Somebody in the family got it, somebody in the family was not able to deal with stress or problems, and they just couldn't handle it. So now that I'm in this field and I'm learning all this, I got to the point where I could see how it's still affecting my family. And I want to get my family on board to help me stop this so that we're all able to help that one person or that one family member that has this problem. So that's my challenge, because my whole family doesn't have that in them. It's just, well, you know, we try to help, but what can we do? What can we do? So I guess my question would be, you know, what advice could you give somebody that's like in my position, trying to open the family to help the one person that needs it?
Thank you for sharing that, Monica. And I think it's so difficult when you feel like you're ready to try to help a family member or a loved one, and you're trying to rally people who also care about this person to do the same, but they're not quite there. a lot of my research and my research program has been about sort of how do we bridge this gap when the care is there, maybe you even know the steps. I mean, you work at Milestones, like you know how it works, you know exactly what you need to do, and then you feel powerless because you don't have the support around you. What can you do? And I think obviously it's amazing that it's starting with you. I mean, you can start that dialogue with the person that you feel like needs help, but sometimes it means that you're going for support outside of the family. You can't get the other family members to rally. Maybe you get other loved ones, friends, other close associates, other professionals, so that you have other people, a team with you, so that you're not the only person who has to confront this person over and over again. Clearly, sometimes people need their own time and process to realize that they need help, but if you're there and you're offering that compassion and you're letting them know that you're ready to help them whenever they're ready, and you just repeat that message, sometimes it takes a lot of different times repeatedly, but I think it's going to be harder if you're trying to run up against trying to change the family members' perspectives who are just not really going to be able to extend themselves in that way right now. Maybe one day they will, but I think you can do a lot by example. I think you can do a lot by you continuing to reinforce the message and potentially thinking about going outside of the family unit for other support for this person to be able to hear this message from other people aside from you.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Brenda and I run Miriam's House, who some of you might have heard of. I just wanted to share a resource. Number one is the population that we deal with is 100% low income, zero income many times. And the first thing I do is ask them, people who call asking for treatment, is have them call 211, which is a county resource. Almost 100% of the time you will be assigned a caseworker and they will follow along with you and get you into treatment. There are so many places, especially in Los Angeles, that if you don't have insurance, they'll try and get you Medi-Cal or some type of insurance, or even, like they've mentioned in their program, scholarship you, but definitely 211. And even, sometimes in our place, for example, we'll get calls about homelessness. I'm on the street, I don't know what to do. I'm having this, episode. And again, 211 will come through and give vouchers for motels. It'll give resources, appointments, all that stuff. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that, because I didn't know that before working at Miriam's House, and it's really great. The other thing that I was going to mention was about cannabis. Or actually, there's two things. So I think that in terms of cannabis, when we think about who pushed for the legalization, people think that it's the recreational part. And while I'm sure that companies that wanted to do that did pour some money in, it was really about harm reduction, and it was about decriminalizing people who have problematic substance abuse. So what happened when Prop 64 passed was a lot of people were able to come out of jail for simple possession of a gram of marijuana. And usually those arrests and those long-term prison sentences were, discriminatory towards low-income people and people of different minorities. So I just wanted to give that part out. And other than that, Miriam's House, it's a sober living for low-income women and children. So if any of you need something like that, aftercare for someone who's come out of treatment, that is definitely something we do. That's it.
My name's Mark, and I'm not an addiction or drug specialist, but I was a suicide specialist for 25 years, and I was mentored by a guy named Dr. Ed Schneidman from UCLA, and he used to refer me all these suicidal people. So I want to give you a tip that you might be able to use, because I'm kind of going around the country and talking to suicide hotlines about something called interventional empathy. And you can take this home and you can use it. It's called the 6 words. And what the 6 words are is when you engage with someone that you're worried about, and what you say to them, and it's like assertive empathy. You say 6 words, and they're going to say, what the WTF or whatever. Let them say that. And the 6 words are hurt, afraid, angry, ashamed, alone, tired. Pick one and start talking. That's different than asking them if they feel that. When you ask people if they feel that, there's a disconnect between you. You know they feel one of them. But if you can use those 6 words, they'll start to talk. Say, pick one. As they begin to talk, ask them, tell me when you felt it at its worst. Because when they tell you when they felt it at its worst, they felt it alone. And when they relive it with you, they're not alone. And if you do it right, they will start to cry. As they start to cry, they will calm down. And you just keep them talking. So those are the 6 words. Hurt, afraid, angry, ashamed, alone, tired. So I hope that helps.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm an alcoholic. I learned that about 45 days ago. I'm in rehab here in Malibu. I'm from Kansas. And we've dealt so much with me, which has been amazing. But I have teenagers to go home to, and the message that I spread to them before I tackled my own addiction was that I know you're going to drink. You know, you're in high school. I know you're going to drink. That's what we all did. But I want you to do it in a safe way. There's Uber. I'll pay for everybody's Uber, blah, blah, blah. Well, I now need to go home and undo what I've said. And that's in part one question. The other question is, I live in an affluent area. My kids have access to everything. All of their friends, it's just what happens. And drugs are rampant. And as parents, it's very difficult because you want to give them their freedom, but you also want to be on top of the situation. And being on top of it often explodes, and it does the opposite. And when I go home, I want to be able to talk correctly about this addiction. But I also want to be able to talk to the other parents about how we can come as a village and really tackle this issue together. And I don't know how to even begin that, but it needs to happen. And I feel I feel so much smarter having been here. But I also want to be able to go home and spread the education correctly, especially when it has to do with the teens in my environment. So I was just wondering if you all had any words of wisdom as to how to go home and spread that word.
First of all, I want to commend you on your recovery.
Thanks.
And stepping into it. The second thing I want to commend is you kind of owning your story and you wanting to rewrite the story with your kids. And part of the work probably going home is working with someone, a family therapist or someone that it is going to be confusing for your teenagers. It's like, Mom, you told me this is okay. And now you're telling me this? Because you now know more of what the story is. And just like Chris talked, it's so important that our kids know their family story. They know what may be coming and how you can help them do it differently. So I encourage you, get the support you need, because that's not an easy conversation coming, but you're right on in thinking that that's what you need to do. So I'll respond to that part of it. Yes.
Thank you for sharing. We have a 13-year-old and an 8-year-old, and parenting, far and away, is the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. Give me any other patient over my kids, But I stumbled on a few science-based things that make sense. And Christopher mentioned it, the family dinner, and that's nice. And we wish we could do more of that, but it's hard. I also tell a lot of families now, not even talking about drugs or alcohol, but saying very simply, add in the things that bring joy to the family. And oftentimes you hear that mantra, do what you're passionate about, do what's fun. But people don't know what they're passionate about. They don't know what's fun because they haven't done it. So you have to install, okay, we're going to go skydiving this weekend. We're going to do gardening. The things that I see that young people under 21 don't have, that I had when I was a kid, was I had sports, I played an instrument, I was a member of several things: Cub Scouts, Scholastic Bowl, violin, a lot of nerdy stuff. You know, I was a part of the AV club. I was in that. I was on the math team, kick asymptotes. But the truth of the matter was, it was mentors. And if there's one thing I think children of Los Angeles do not have, it's a variety of mentors. They barely get to talk to their teachers outside of class. Now with the church, they're afraid to talk to their priests. They're sending them to your neighbors to talk to your neighbors isn't done anymore. It's seen as you're pawning your kids off. So finding additional adult mentors for your children other than you is really, really essential. That's number one. Number two, the culture of imperfection. So there's a lot of books out there about that, but this idea that you have to be spectacular. So one of the big challenges I railed on was, again, that we see it all the time. The helicopter parenting combined with the not keeping score in school. So I think that, at least in my experience, has really made my kids believe I'm going to be number one all the time. So our son came back with these standardized test scores, and he rocked it like top 1 percentile. And my heart dropped. So I said to him, do you really think you're that smart? He goes, yeah, I do. So you haven't worked that hard. You haven't ever failed. He said, Dad, you never failed either. And so I said, but I worked really hard. So the question, though, comes, how do we let our children learn how to deal with loss, how to develop resiliency? So about 2 months ago, our oldest son, they were playing a hockey game. They were down 6-1. They lost. The next game, they lost 10-0. And I was freaking out. He's going to be crying. He's going to say, I never want to play hockey again. To his credit, he said, Dad, that was the best time I had. Because it taught me something. It taught me I'm not going to be a professional hockey player. But it taught him skills and resiliency. So I think the things our children of LA need, they need to be reminded that they're human and they're not perfect. They need to be reminded that what they see on social media is fake news. And they need to be reminded that we as parents are not perfect either. And that we're not expecting perfection, but we're expecting humanism, and for us to be that. So mentorship, trying out new things that are joyful, and really just allowing the kids freedom and space. One of the things that we found that reduces burnout in our industry is actually unstructured time with peers. That's called play. But we don't do that enough even for ourselves. So if we don't do that for adults, how is it that we don't do that for children? And when we find ourselves arresting 8-year-olds for walking their dog in this world, how are we going to let our children play and just explore? So I know that's a little bit, but that's stuff I actually use in the office to try and encourage that. And those are real world tasks that we can do. So none of them say, go back to saying to your children, don't use drugs. They go back to saying, no, celebrate who you are, learn from others, be imperfect, and then you will develop perfectly. I got that from a fortune cookie. Be imperfect, and then you'll develop perfectly.
Thank you. Are there any thoughts on the community, the other parents? How can we work together? I don't know. Maybe they're not in the same place I'm at. I don't think they are. I think that they're still not necessarily in denial. I'm not going to start calling them out, but I do believe that there's a lot of partying amongst the parents, and it's just the kids inherit that, obviously. They're seeing what we're all doing. That's how we socialize. We don't know these people very well, but we know if we go over to their house for a party, there'll be a drink there that'll ease the conversation up, and that's what our kids are seeing. But I'm wondering how I can speak to the moms and be a better front for this. And I just don't know if there's any wisdom out there at this point, or if it's too much of a lost cause. I know I can show them by example, but beyond that, I don't know what else. I'd like to go home and work on this problem with my friends.
Well, I think with you being in recovery, I'm a recovering person, and I know with my kids, I was really pretty clear genetically, you're at a huge risk because of me. And so my daughter made it all the way through high school and didn't drink, and my son has made it through high school as well, and he hopefully will never drink. He had some early childhood trauma, he had cancer, so he's like, that's like the 2-strike rule, add alcohol with him, and here we go. I think typically, I know a lot of the kids that my kids grew up with, the parents were pretty permissive, and drinking was okay if it was at home and they were around, and I think it's just it's a horrible message. I think if you allow a kid's brain to grow and you can keep him away from substances till he's 18, you have a much, much better chance. I think the statistic was if you're smoking pot before 15, you're 5 times more likely to have issues with chemicals. I think unfortunately parents are, we're so, if I could have $5 for every time I've had a parent tell me, well, I smoked pot in high school and college and I turned out okay. If I could, and it's like, well, first of all, the pot that your child's smoking is significantly more powerful than what you were smoking in high school. I think so often we just kind of look the other way. It's hard being a parent. It's hard setting limits. It's hard keeping an eye on your kids and trying to keep them healthy is not easy. I think because you are recovering, I think you could quite possibly get people's attention in your crowd. So I think it would make a lot of sense for you, especially with your kids' peer group, those parents, I think it would make a lot of sense for you to be a mama bear around them as far as what goes on around your kids.
Thanks. Thank you.
I'm so happy that we're having these conversations, and thank you all for these amazing questions. Maybe we have time for one more question if someone wants to come up. Okay.
Thank you for tilting this down. Okay, so we're talking a lot about education, and I am a formal educator. And so I just think it'd be very important to ask you guys your input on, nowadays we have teas for mothers and daughters to talk about their bodies and things of that sort, but how do we get the ball rolling with something in regards to mental health or addiction and of that sort? And how do we, I guess I'm asking your advice for someone who has ideas. Where do they start? Who do we contact to shake up the system? What is your input on prevention? Because prevention of these things are also something that is very important and needs to be discussed.
I don't think it's ever too early to start talking about it. I don't think it's too early to start the education process. And I know that there are schools that actually have programs now that, they really do build it into the curriculum. It's mandatory, so it's not sort of like this after-school thing that people have to stick around for, where they have a conversation about mental health and resources and the types of signs that you might notice. But because of the fact that our younger generation is living most of their social lives online now, I feel like that's another area in which we need to be able to strengthen our efforts. Very recently, so I am an online gamer. I play a lot of video games. And one day when I was playing my usual online game, which is Clash Royale, this person in the chat room started saying a lot of very concerning things about how he felt really lonely, how he felt like he wanted to kill himself, that he lost his brother 2 years ago to suicide, and that people were bullying him at school and making fun of him, and that he was hoping that he could hire hitmen to go and take care of these individuals. And it just became really clear that he was really lonely and had nobody to speak to, and that nobody had ever spoken to him about any of these things. So myself and a lot of the other people who were playing the game at the time, we all rallied and we all started to talk to him. And he was only 14 at the time, and I just feel like that is sort of becoming a forum in which people can probably put some of their educational efforts, because that's where people feel like their bonds are. That's where people feel like their community can be, especially in this younger generation. So I think some of the conversation can start there. Some of the conversation can start at home as early as possible. And I think a big part of it is destigmatizing it. I really hate labels, but I know we need them. We need them to diagnose a problem, to do research, to know what evidence-based care is, and to find the right interventions. But I think the labels are very stigmatizing, and nobody wants to be singled out because we still don't have that same treatment of disorders of the brain the same way that we have any other organ or part of the body. And we're still working on that. I know that a lot of people talked about that today. This medical model, this is not shaming the individual, but unfortunately, we still see that everywhere. And I think unless we can approach the conversations without sort of that stigma, we're gonna keep having the same problem. So it's really just about normalizing it, giving them the statistics that 1 out of 3 or 4 people in their lifetime are going to experience something like depression. Dr. Fong mentioned 1 out of 7 people are using marijuana now in America. Well, what does that mean? How many of those people are gonna end up having some level of problem with it, even if you don't wanna call it a substance use disorder? And so I think just showing that there's so many other people that might be suffering these symptoms and that it's okay and that it's important to talk about it because the community is really what we need. And if we can talk to the community, then you feel less lonely, you have more resources, and you don't feel like you're the only person going through it. I think that's probably a good place to start.
We have one final quick question.
My final thing isn't really a question, but just a statement on behalf of my generation. There's a lot of kids out there who are being raised without a father, without parents in general. Please take action. It's important that we have these conversations, but these are all ideas until we execute. I see a lot of bad things, to put it in simple terms, happening in my country. I'm not going to sit back and watch my country being taken away from me. I'm going to go vote. I'm going to do anything in my power to make sure that when I have kids, I'm raising them and I'm there for them like my father wasn't there for me. Anybody that suffers from addiction needs help, and we all need to be there for each other, and we need to do this together. Thank you for everybody who's contributed. This has been an eye-opening experience for me. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I have 2 quick important things to say. Again, we have our resource room and our compassion room available. There are therapists there to provide additional resources and support and education. And also, we will be doing this event again with Christopher Kennedy Lawford, who will be presenting once more and an exceptional panel of speakers again. We'll be doing that in November, and we will send out an email with the date and the information about that. So for one last thank you to Christopher Kennedy Lawford, our incredible panel, thank you so much for your time and expertise. And most importantly, thank you guys. Thank you for coming today, for supporting this, and please spread the word that we're going to be doing this again to provide more support to our community. Have a wonderful evening and drive home safely.